everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. South Korea, the U.S., and Japan recently staged what was an unprecedented aerial exercise with Washington's nuclear-capable heavy bomber escorted by aircraft from the three countries. This came amid escalating missile and nuclear threats from North Korea, which is strengthening ties ever more with Russia. Eyes are on when Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to Pyongyang will be, as Moscow's foreign minister made a recent visit to the regime. How are the tensions developing on the peninsula? For more on this, we have invited Doctor Go Myong-hyun, a senior fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Dr. Go.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for being with us. And we also have Dr. Mark Berry, Associate Editor Emeritus of the International Journal on World Peace. Good to see you, Dr. Berry.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Berry, first question. So South Korea, the U.S., and Japan took part in a joint aerial exercise for the first time near the Korean Peninsula on Sunday. What was this about and what significance did it have?
Well, you know, there's been a lot of bilateral military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, or the U.S. and Japan. This is the first time ever where there was a joint aerial exercise involving all three countries. And even though it wasn't a lot of aircraft, the centerpiece, of course, was the B-52, which is nuclear capable, but currently not configured to carry nuclear weapons. But it sends a message. And it's all an outgrowth of the Camp David summit in August, where such exercises were an agreed outcome of the trilateral summit. And it's manifested in the exercises that we saw just a few days ago. So it's a materialization of the Camp David summit. And I think this is the most important kind of demonstration for the three countries to make, and to keep, actually, particularly at this time, this month in October, to keep the verbiage down. Just let the actions speak louder than words.
All right, I see, Dr. Berry. Well, Dr. Go, as far as I know, the exercise involved fighter jets from the three countries escorting a key U.S. strategic asset, as our Dr. Berry already mentioned, the B-52 bomber. What is so unique about this?
So there are three types of strategic bomber in the United States military. So one is the B-52H version that we're talking about right now. The other two are B-2, which is this bomber. And there's also B-1B bomber, which is more updated version of a strategic bomber than B-52, which was deployed for the first time in the 1950s. So, so compared to that, B-52, even though it's nuclear capable, it's one of the oldest ones. But then the other particularity here is that it sends a very strong signal to North Korea. As Dr. Berry had mentioned, this is one out of the three strategic bombers that the United States military has in operation right now. It's one of the two that are actually nuclear capable, B-52 and B-2. And that's the reason why the United States has refrained from deploying B-52 to the Korean Peninsula in exercises, because the United States previously was concerned that this could send the wrong signal to North Korea and by extension to China. And the United States doesn't want to be seen as a culprit in raising tensions in the region. But now this is actually a reflection of not just the Camp David agreement between the three countries, but also the realization of the summit between South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol as well as the President Biden back in April. The outcome of that was the establishment of the Nuclear Consultative Group. And there's also an agreement there that the United States will deploy on a regular basis this kind of strategic assets. So so B-52 is coming here on the following one of the another important naval deployment, which is the deployment of the aircraft carrier earlier this year. So this is we are seeing a series of assurance strengthening measures and deterrence and assurance strengthening measures on the part of the United States, which is a combination of the promises that the United States made through the Nuclear Consultative Group back in April, as well as the Camp David summit in August.
All right, I see your point. Well, Dr. Go, one more question. Depending depending on the extent of North Korea's nuclear missile threats, officials say this security cooperation between the three countries might strengthen even more based on what they have agreed upon during the Camp David summit. In what ways could this be strengthened?
So, for reference, you have to look at not the Camp David agreement. You should look at the summit outcome. Then back in April, we have to look at the Camp David agreement because this involves the trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. In that statement, the three countries have agreed to not just to conduct joint military exercises. In fact, the statement makes a specific mention of the multi-domain exercises, so which involves not just the air exercises that we have just seen, but also land, naval, as well as cybersecurity, and so forth. So we are going to see more exercises like this in other domains. I think we're going to see, for instance, joint anti-missile defense exercises. This is something that came up in the statement, and in fact, the three countries held similar exercises earlier this year and the last year as well. I think what these three countries are going to do is they're going to conduct exercises that are outwardly specifically focused on North Korea, but also they're going to take into consideration other types of threats that are emerging in the region, for instance, from Russia. So I think one of the positive effect about this recent trilateral air exercises will be Russia and China are going to refrain from conducting joint air patrols over the East Sea, which they have been conducting since 2018, which coincided again with the worsening of the relationship between Seoul and Tokyo. So I think in combination, what we're going to see is that the Japan, Korea, and the United States are going to essentially send jointly a strong signal, not just to North Korea, but also to China and Russia. And then eventually, I think that we want to see more stability in the region as a result.
All right, I see. Well, shifting our gears a bit to Lavrov's visit to Pyongyang, Dr. Barry. During his reception speech, he said Russia supports North Korean policies to defend its national interest. And experts say this is quite significant as it could be considered as Russia acknowledging Pyongyang's possession of nuclear weapons and its policy to strengthen its capabilities. How do you see this?
I don't see it that way. I think Russia's a long-standing policy going back decades of saying that North Korea has a right to self-defense, that U.S. ROK and Japanese policies tend to be on the aggressive side in the Soviet and now Russian view, and therefore Lavrov was just reflecting long-standing Soviet and Russian policy, and it's the standard kind of thing that someone of Lavrov's position would be expected to say when he's visiting in Pyongyang. So I don't read more into it than that. I think there's a much larger picture going on, both above board and below the surface that we need to keep an eye on.
All right, so it was just a long-standing standard policy. Now, I see. Well, Dr. Go, though details have not been unveiled, Lavrov spoke with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un, for about an hour. And there, Kim reportedly expressed Pyongyang's steadfast stand to establish far-reaching and forward-looking plan for the bilateral ties. What does this hint at?
Well, this is very significant in my view. I think one of the speculations that we had, the experts had, before the summit but the meeting between, the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Kim Jong-un was whether this realignment or rapprochement between Moscow and Pyongyang was one-time thing, whether this the summit that we have seen in Vladivostok earlier was really a transactional meeting where Russia would offer technology and then maybe other types of economic assistance in exchange for massive military assistance in the form of munitions from North Korea. But so this statement essentially is saying that that's not going to be the case, at least for now. So the Russians and the North Koreans have agreed in principle that the recent tightening of relationship between these two countries is not really a one-time event. That it signals a much longer, stable realignment of objectives. So in a way, this is their way of signaling that they're upgrading their relationship to something that approaches an alliance. So, but then we have to be very careful when you characterize this as an alliance, because alliance means, that at least the alliance that South Korea has with the United States is a much, much higher level. But then for Russia and North Korea to discuss this is that they might be having much closer consultation on their foreign policy objectives as well as the security objectives. And this is where we should be concerned about.
Right, so these words are definitely signifying this long-term approachment, like you said. Right, I see. Well, Dr. Barry, many say Lavrov's visit was to arrange a possible trip to Pyongyang by Putin. When do you believe such a visit might take place, and what would it mean if it does happen?
Well, before October 7th, a lot of analysts said that it would happen by the end of the year. But now, in the past 2.5 weeks, I think we're in a whole different ballgame globally. I think Putin is actually outstanding for his absence from the scene. The fact that Netanyahu in Israel has not, to my knowledge, been on the phone with Putin, as would have happened in the past under Soviet leaders. The Soviet Union used to play a very strong role in the Middle East. I think at this point, it's actually more up to China to play a role in the Middle East situation. So I think Putin is uncertain how to proceed, and I think, and also he can't even travel as he normally would have because of the ICC warrants out for his arrest in those countries that have signed the ICC treaty. So this is a very much hampered and hand-tied President Putin, and I think it's utterly uncertain even if he will make a visit to Pyongyang. It's simply not a Russian priority right now. All
right, quite uncertain. Now, Dr. Barry, one more question. We have already seen reports saying there has been a transfer of arms between Moscow and Pyongyang. Following their elevated bilateral ties, though we do not know when Putin is going to visit Pyongyang, what further cooperation do you expect to see between the two?
There's only so much ammo that Pyongyang can provide to Moscow. But they need it now. They don't care about next week, the Russians. They need it now. They were successful in repelling a Ukrainian spring and summer offensive. Now we have to see what may happen in the winter. If anything, Putin may look at the situation in the Middle East as a convenient distraction. So I think he wants to make maximum usage of what ammunition North Korea can provide, assuming that most of it even works, because it's probably the oldest ammunition. We're learning the boat routes that go between North Korea and several Soviet ports near Vladivostok. Otherwise, I imagine it all goes across the Trans-Siberian Railroad to depots that are in southern Russia near Ukraine. But I think this is a very short-lived relationship. And at the same time, I think North Korea, they don't really see much of a future to this. They're going to realize that Putin is a fair weather friend, meaning when the weather turns cloudy and rainy and stormy, he's not available and he's not that friendly. And I think this will be borne out in the coming 4 to 6 months.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Barry. Well, Dr. Go, staying on the when we are talking about relationship between Russia and North Korea, we cannot leave out China. And so it seems China is quite distancing itself from what is happening between Russia and North Korea. What could be China's view on this matter?
Well, it's going to be quite interesting. I think there are two layers to Chinese view on the recent tightening of relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang. At least officially or like externally, China seems to be, as you pointed out, seems to be distancing itself from this development, which is taking place right next door from China. But I think underneath, I think China is purely positive about this development. So for China's position in the world is quite different from Russia, let alone North Korea. Russia is very much isolated from the international community, so is North Korea. So these two countries are being regarded as rogue states that which don't abide by the established international norms, and clearly they don't respect the values such as human rights and stuff. But then China it's being seen as a moral responsible country among these three, and in fact has a lot of influence economically and politically and diplomatically. And China likes that. I think China wants to be respected, wants to be position itself in the position of influence. And China understands that if China gets too close to these two countries, Russia and North Korea, they might lose that influence. And then in the worst case scenario, China might be held responsible for the misbehavior on the part of Russia and North Korea. So, but at the same time, China is part of this axis of anti-Western countries. We're thinking about three authoritarian countries here. What unites them is the common negative view about the United States. So in a sense, China probably thinks that on the other hand, weakening of the United States or the United States being occupied by these kind of challenges around the world only makes China better off strategically. So in that sense, China doesn't want to prevent Russia and North Korea from getting close, or even like carrying out provocation that could lead to instability in the region, but not too much. So China is essentially trying to position itself in a way that maximizes the influence that it has in the global community with the United States, with the Western countries, and South Korea and Japan as well. But at the same time, in the long run, he wants to see spoilers such as Russia and North Korea causing trouble to the United States and the West. So in that sense, China is a balancing job going on right now. So I think that's the reason why it doesn't officially celebrate or approve what's going on between Russia and North Korea. But then at the same time, it's very clear that it's in their interest to see Russia being helped by North Korea and vice versa.
Right. So at least China is refraining from making some comments regarding this ties between Russia and North Korea. But regarding this, some experts say that South Korea needs to manage its relationship with China in order to prevent China's active involvement or engagement in this cooperation. What's your view on this?
So that's the thing. I think whenever we discuss about China's role in the Korean Peninsula, we have this I would say, unwanted effect of empowering China in South Korea's global and regional affairs. So we don't know what we have this understanding that it's in China's interest to protect North Korea, to ensure that North Korea remains essentially capable of threatening South Korea and the United States. And so that's going to be their long-term interest. But at the same time, we should realize by now that it's not in the interest of China to engage in denuclearization of North Korea. I mean, we tried that before. China subscribes to the idea of non-proliferation, but hasn't done enough, has consistently done it hasn't done enough consistently in terms of denuclearization. So I think we should be very careful about engaging China, especially bilaterally between us, South Korea and China, because we might get into this trap of empowering China's role in the Korean Peninsula unintentionally. So I think this is the reason why we should be very steadfast and principled when it comes to our approach towards China, and it should be done in conjunction with our allies. So I think that this is a very important principle that we should abide by when we deal with China.
All right, I see. Great advice from Dr. Go. Now, Dr. Berry, before we wrap up, I would like to briefly ask about the impact that geopolitical tension in the Middle East region could have on the Korean Peninsula. Israel is saying it will begin a ground invasion, which could result in more countries, including the U.S., becoming directly involved. How that affects South Korea's defense posture against North Korea?
Everything has a ripple effect. This period is very reminiscent of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. I remember in 1989 being in staffing a senior U.S. delegation of former State Department and Pentagon officials to Prime Minister Shamir's office in Jerusalem. And he reminisced very much about how grateful he was for U.S. assistance at that time and how close the world had come to a global or wider war. So I see this situation right now with tremendous trepidation. You have two U.S. carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. You have, in fact, one of the carrier groups is going to shift to the Persian Gulf. The stated purpose, according to Secretary Blinken, is to ward off the possibility of Hezbollah joining into the fray by firing up to 150,000 of its rockets at northern Israel. Also, you had overnight Israel striking several locations in southern Syria, killing several Syrian personnel. So it's the possibility of a wider war, including one in which President Assad of Syria calls up President Putin and asks for protection from the Americans, is very great. So when you ask about how this will affect the South Korea's defense posture against North Korea, all I could say is that events may drown us all out. It will sweep us in. We have to be very, very careful with what we say and how we behave. And President Biden is extremely cautious right now because I personally believe he does not see the current Israeli government that took office in January as being a responsible government in the traditional sense of the word, and could get the United States into a lot more trouble. And that's why you see the Biden administration pushing for a more slow-going approach, one in which humanitarian aid can be opened up to Israel, to Gaza rather, and also to see more hostages released. The United States is very, very afraid of being enmeshed in a much wider conflict, one in which Israel will not be as responsible as in 1973 in its handling of that war. I can go on, but that's the basic picture that I see.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry. One more question. According to some reports, discussions have begun involving some countries, including Saudi Arabia, rebuilding the Gaza Strip after the situation stabilizes in the region. Given the ties between South Korea and Saudi Arabia, is there any possibility Seoul could be asked to play a role?
Well, that's way over the horizon on one hand, but on the other hand, I think it's extraordinarily significant that President Yoon has made the trip at this time in the middle of this Middle East crisis to visit Saudi Arabia, to meet with MBS, to meet with the Qatari Emir, as he has done this morning. South Korea is portraying itself as the dependable power in the world. And so, although I fear that Gaza will be utterly destroyed, because Saudi Arabia was in the process of normalizing relations with Israel, and only the events of October 7th has forestalled it, but MBS has said that he'd like to pursue it at the end of the war. Some experts are postulating that the Saudi money will be involved in the rebuilding of Gaza as part of Saudi-Israeli normalization. And it seems to me unnatural, after President Yoon's visit, to have the most significant construction component taken up by the South Koreans. But more than that, South Korea can be in the position of being a peacemaker and unifier in the region, which is needed more than ever, more than any other time in the history of the crises between Israel and the Palestinians and the wider Arab world.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Berry, for your time and insights. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Go, for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.